Yeah, today I want to talk about a little bit about some experience and insights that I've had. I'm a consultant that works with a lot of organizations, typically enterprises, but also software as a service. And in the process of doing that, I come into different organizations and see them at the initial stages of establishing their API platform. Maybe they've been doing that for a little bit, and they're looking to mature their processes, systematize some things, start to scale and grow their efforts. So I want to share a little bit about that and some insights without giving away who it is. So I'm the founder of LaunchAny. I'm the author of Principles of Web API Design, Delivering Value with APIs and Microservices. And I'm also a corporate and public training. I deliver workshops. I'm based out of Colorado Springs, and I curate, those of you that might be subscribed to API Developer Weekly. So if you've ever gotten one of those emails with lots of links, that's me. Today I want to talk about 5 things. We're going to talk about establishing a focus on the people of your API platform. I think we talk a lot about technology, we talk a lot about tools, but sometimes we forget the people. So we're going to talk about that. Then we'll talk a little bit about how to build processes for your API platform. We're going to talk about establishing a product mindset and why that's important. And then we'll talk about how to grow, mature, and scale your API platform. So the first thing, establishing a focus on the people your API platform will serve. A lot of times when we think about API platforms, everybody comes up with a different idea. So I consulted the experts, ChatGPT. And this is what they told me an API platform was. They said that it was a comprehensive suite of tools and services to facilitate development, deployment, and management of APIs. Maybe you agree with that. I did find a tool vendor that had something kind of similar, a software system with integrated tools and processes. But I think we have to expand our definition a little bit. I don't know how many people do subscribe to the newsletter or were following the API Futures hashtag that was going on just about a month ago or so, I believe, or a month and a half ago. And there were a lot of different authors in the API space, and we all were just kind of sharing our thoughts on where things are going. And one of the things that I shared was a little bit of a reality check for a lot of us. I think things are not quite like what they used to be, and things are shifting back now to the business. We've had time to modernize. We've had time to play with the Kubernetes and the Docker containers and the cloud and the serverless and the functions and all the things. And now it's time to really start delivering value to the business. We got our budgets, we built our technologies, and now we got to deliver. And I think APIs are absolutely at the center of this, and an API platform and a strategy around that is going to help you drive there. So when we think about the definition of what is an API platform and the current demands that we have, I think we have to expand the role of what an API platform really means. We have to start thinking about all the participants, not just the processes and tools. Not just the really cool technologies and the fun details of HTTP that some of us really love to get into. So I try to expand the definition a little bit. I'm not one for trying to define a lot of different things, but I do want to make sure that when you think about an API platform, think of about an ecosystem. It's going to have multiple parties involved, and it's going to be intentionally designed APIs that are meant to delight and empower your workforce, partners, and customers to deliver desired outcomes. This isn't just about technology. This is about helping people get things done and helping people along in their journey. So when we think about doing that, a lot of times when I engage with organizations, particularly in the early stages when they're establishing their platform, they're going to look at 2 sides of the equation, the IT capabilities and their business capabilities. And what they'll do is they'll look at what are we bringing to the market and what IT skills do we have that we can leverage. And they're going to use that to launch their API initiative. And oftentimes they start focusing on those data sources. We just got to get data out of a silo. We've got to get this data over the wire. We've got to get this to another person. And that is a good start. But I would argue that that's oftentimes the lowest value we can deliver to the people using our APIs. And that in reality, what we need to do is start looking at more of the API platform as a way to blend the business and IT together. So this isn't just getting raw data over the wire, maybe to some kind of specification, an interoperability spec, an open specification. but really to think about what are the desired outcomes of the market that we need to deliver to. What are some innovations we can do that can give desirable outcomes that people aren't even thinking about? And then how do we create a platform to not only enable those things, but to allow people to react to the processes that we're integrating with? And so that's where our highest value is, in that platform. But it requires us to look at the people aspect, not just the technology. So I would say that a successful API platform starts with a focus on delivering value. And we spend a lot of time talking about how to design APIs, but I don't see quite as much time, although more this time than in past years, about consuming APIs. So is your organization developing a culture to consume first and build when necessary? Or are you just purely building? Now, I've worked with both. I've worked with some organizations that spend their time building so many APIs that you can't find anything because their catalog is so full of APIs. And so you end up just building something new and something new over and over again. And there's nothing wrong with building competing APIs to see which one works out. But when people automatically go to the I need to design and build an API, and they're not consuming, then we're missing the purpose of the API platform. Or as Steve Yagi said in his famous post that documented the Jeff Bezos mandate, one of the other things he talked about was some of the difficulties that they had in building a platform, and he suggested start with the platform, then use it for everything. And so that translates into the API space as start to consume APIs. Build good consumers of your platform. Don't just build APIs and put it into a catalog and call it done. So the first thing that we want to do when we want to establish an API platform is to focus on the people and the intent and the purpose of that platform. So understand the needs of the participants involved, shift to the consume first, build when necessary approach, and then leverage the API platform for everything. Second, we do need to look at some processes, and I'm going to talk about that dreaded word, governance. Yeah, some organizations actually that I work with say don't ever use that word. We use guide rails, we use standards and practices, we tiptoe around it. But yeah, governance. What I end up seeing most often when I first engage with an organization, and this is pretty much for everybody, individual teams are building their own standards. They're building their own practices. They're all arguing with whether it should be snake case, camel case, kebab case in the URLs. And we all know kebab case wins anyway, so. But we're all going to argue, we're going to go into analysis paralysis, trying to figure out what we need to do with our API. And so the first thing we oftentimes do is look to see if there's an API style guide. Inevitably, there is one. It's probably dated 2021, and this being 2024. And it's on Confluence somewhere, and somebody put a lot of work into it, maybe several people, and no one uses it. No one knows it's there until I start asking. So what we have to do oftentimes is stand up some sort of formal process to get everybody together on the same page and say, let us save you time. This is not to be dictatorial about how we do everything. We have different rules and different guidelines that we need to have in place for standards and practices. So stand up an API center for enablement, C4E, or a COE, or an API guild, or a practice, or an office, or whatever you might call it. Find people passionate about APIs, bring them together, help them to steward this, socialize it, and enable people to be able to move on with their life. There is too much to do in a day. I don't know about you, but I feel like my days are getting shorter and shorter. I'm running out of time. I don't have time for anything. I can't get done what I used to get done in the same amount of time for some reason. And so now I don't need to sit there and spin over with a team trying to figure out what to do. Just get it pulled together and start to help enable people to do things. And if you have people pushing back to say, look, we're trying to help with the 80%. You know, it's that Pareto principle of 80-20. And 80% of the teams will probably be able to use these standards and have some default decisions that can be made and move on. And then the other ones, let's talk about where the exceptions occur, because there will be exceptions. But that's where your API C4E team stands up. And if you can have a dedicated team, fantastic. If you can't, Have a fractional team, start there, do what you can, meet people where they're at. I always like to say that the API C4E, or whatever you're standing up, has one goal in two parts. Advocate for the API consumers. Your job is to help make the API consumer's job better, not to be dictatorial about the design, but at the same time enable your API producers to get things done and to do it quickly. And so there's some fascinating tools I've seen in the sponsor booths and that I've heard different ideas and technologies and things going on. We're not in any way short of tools and technologies, but it means that we have to put some into practice. So one of the things that we'll do when we first start out is try to have empathy for the API consumer and the API producer. So we'll map out the journey. And this is one example of one we did. It's for a worldwide hotel chain. And they had some very strict governance rules about how and who used their APIs and how they were going to onboard their partners. And so they needed things like a customer go-live approval, and they wanted to do some different things to make sure that before someone had a production key, they had gone through and taken certain measures, certain steps. I mean, it's no different than we see with Stripe and other financial websites where you've got to kind of use the sandbox a little bit before you're given production access. We did the same thing for producers. What flow do they have, or what journey do they have as they're going through and designing and delivering on APIs? What's their journey like? And what are the steps that are required? And we start mapping that out. We figure out what tools and standards and practices we have, what the gaps are, and we fill that. That's the role of the API C4E. But beyond that, their role is also to create a clear engagement model for anyone building or consuming APIs. So engaging with them in Q&A through Stack Overflow sites or Teams or Slack or whatever you might want to have. And then leveling that up a little bit and saying, let's have an office hours once or twice a week for an hour. Let people bring in their questions. If they need more than that, or more than maybe 10 or 15 minutes, if we have to timeshare with other people that are showing up that have questions, let's take it to a design coaching session or a consumption session or something. Let's get somebody paired up with them. No different than the DevRel work that many of you might do or have other people around you that do. That kind of engagement, both for design teams, producer teams, and for the consumer teams is massive because now they have support. They're not alone. They're not figuring things out on their own. You can probably answer a question for them or point them to another team that's doing something similar to what they're trying to do. And then you can really even take it further. You can actually facilitate design sessions with teams if you want. Or do what a lot of the startups did years ago when they first started launching their API products, pair up with them and start coding. Help them out. Engage with them. This is what teams need. This is what the people need. They don't just need standards, practices alone. They need people there that can help them along the way. So get people-centric processes in place. Get a formalized program of some sort. Set clear expectations and set up an engagement model. And make sure that you have support for the teams and guide them through that process. Number 3, establish a product mindset. We all hear, and we even heard this morning, APIs are products. I don't disagree with that. I think sometimes the effort that we need to put into a smaller service that sits behind the scenes might not merit as much rigor as something that's going outside to a partner or public developer. And in that case, what we want to do is think about other people that are looking at our APIs and saying, well, we might not need as much rigor, but we do need to keep in mind that product leaders and executives are now incorporating APIs into their day-to-day execution. I've seen it. APIs are no longer for developers. We might have known that for some time, but I think it bears repeating and thinking about. One of the clients that I had recently had a dev portal provided by a API management layer that I will not name. And that portal had a login screen. So we had 4 open API specs published with documentation behind a login screen. 5 people in an organization of 10,000 had the ID and password account set up on this. And it wasn't even linked to SSO, so we couldn't even sign in with our corporate account. 5 people out of 10,000 knew how to get to the OpenAPI docs. So you can tell, you know this is going to be a success story from the very beginning that everybody's using these APIs, right? They were undergoing modernization, they were working through the process, and they hadn't really thought about, gosh, we need to open this up. So what we did is we removed that documentation from behind said API management layer. We published it into a shared location on the corporate network. We improved the documentation by adding things like business level capabilities to the intro of our OpenAPI specs, so that people had a bulleted list, because you know you can put Markdown in the description of your OpenAPI documentation. Some of you know it, some of you may not be aware of it. And so you can just do bullet points. This does these 5 things. What happened was that as soon as it was published and we had that kind of documentation in addition to the reference documentation, we had VPs and C-level execs showing off the API portal in every meeting they were in. They would stop 5-10 minutes early and say, have you seen the developer portal? And they'd pull it up, flip their laptop around, or throw it onto the screen and say, look at what we can do now. We have APIs, and this is what they do. And because they could understand it, they didn't have to understand HTTP. Some of them did, some of them didn't. But it was pretty amazing. So thinking about a digital product mindset, it's a way of delivering on the needs of the market by productizing digital assets that deliver desired outcomes, resulting in customer delight and an empowered workforce. Doesn't necessarily mean that we have to package them up and put them out externally. Our internal APIs could look like this as well, and that's exactly what happened. These executives were sharing internal APIs. Now, some of them were meant for partners, but many of them were internal. We love to talk about this stuff, right? The gets and the posts and the 200 OKs and the 201 createds, and I love doing that too. It's fun. Who here reads the HTTP specifications for fun? I mean, yeah, it's great stuff. So we think about our API interactions sometimes as SMS messages, or that's how I like to kind of think about it, and then we have all the HTTP details behind the scenes. That's one kind of conversation, the machine to machine. The other one is developer to developer. We build docs. We have developer experience. We focus on DX. We make sure that the developers are able to understand what the API does. So there's another conversation. So we have the machine to machine, and we're figuring that out. The developer to developer, the docs, the examples, the guides, all the wonderful stuff that we're supposed to be doing. But ultimately, APIs are conversation human to human. They just happen to use a machine to make it happen. Most of the time, what we're dealing with is a human-to-human interaction. And what we have to do is we have to spend time understanding what the needs of the human are, and then translate that into APIs. So what I encourage people to do is to use things like job stories. Here, who's heard of job stories before? Yeah, okay. So job stories are kind of like user stories. Alan Clement came up with this format back in 2013. It was based on the jobs to be done, JTBD theory, that Clayton Christensen came up with, which was rooted in the voice of the customer from the 80s. So we just keep repeating this stuff over and over again, just like we do with software and everything else. And what we end up doing is summarizing the insights that we have from our product discovery. Discovery, yeah. So we need to figure out what the API needs to do. And then we can put it in a format like this: when I want to, so I can. When is the problem or the situation? The triggering event. The I want to is the job to be done. Either that person's going to do it or someone else is going to do it for them. And the so I can. What's the desired outcome that we're trying to achieve? Sounds a little like an acceptance test to developers, right? If I start with a situation or a state that represents a problem, and then I execute a series of code methods or API calls, I should be able to get to a target state. And I know that my system is working properly because I've done that. Well, job stories are basically just a simple format that product managers, product owners, UX experts, a lot of people use, that we can use as well to drive APIs, to understand and gain empathy for the people that are going to be doing these tasks, this human to human, through our APIs. Then we can take those and break those down into process steps, activity steps. You can use event storming if you prefer that. You can use workflow diagrams, whatever you want, to break those job stories down. What's that job to be done? What are the steps to get there? Just about all of us probably work in some sort of environment where there's a multi-step process. Our APIs are probably more than just one operation. So they require orchestration, they require thought, they require workflow. So we teach organizations to do that, and that's what I do in my book, gratuitous plug, but this is the book where I talk about doing that and why it's important to take that outside-in, outcome-centered view of designing APIs. So not just pushing data around. It gets us back to the people, the needs, the jobs to be done. Okay, so develop a product mindset, leverage job stories to focus on delivering outcome-based APIs, and incorporate an API design-first process. Doing that helps us to pull together the people aspect of our APIs. Number 4, grow and mature your API platform. So what happens when you start taking your API platform out beyond a certain group? Most of the time it starts with one group. It's a group, a line of business. Maybe it's a domain or subdomain area, somebody that gets APIs a little bit further than everybody else. One of the things we do is we do platform mapping, or we model the API platform, and we do that by doing mapping the business operating model. What are the processes that we do every day? I would be willing to bet that just about everybody in your organization can probably tell you what they do every day, but they might not be able to tell you what the person next to them does every day. So getting people together and understanding how this looks allows us to then start to map out our platform beyond just an immediate use case that we're delivering, but to look at the entire organization section by section, map that out, figure out areas of collaboration, dependency, overlap. I did this recently for an organization that acquired a number of different companies over the years. And so you have different systems, multiple systems in parallel. Imagine you say, well, okay, where's the API to create an account? And they say, well, in what system? That might sound familiar, right? And then, well, okay, not just what system, but which product? And you go, why? Well, there's this one group that we acquired, and they have a product, and we haven't really brought them over yet, and so they have their own system, and so we have to have accounts here and there and everywhere. And, security teams are just living on caffeine, trying to make sure everything's okay. That's what this does, is it allows you to step back and just map out the processes. And it doesn't take any special tools or anything else other than being able to draw basic flow charts, if nothing else. Boxes, arrows, diamonds for decisions, whatever you want to do to map out your process. And this makes a huge, huge difference. What that does then for the API platform, it starts to give us a taxonomy. It helps us to understand where the boundaries are at. We start to do a broadly scoped view of the organization. Where there's different departments and product units, we can understand what's in common, what's being replicated or duplicated or whatnot, and then how do we need to lay out our API platform as a result? And it might be that you have a strategy to consolidate these different groups and to get them all under one API. The one API to rule them all for one particular business unit or domain area, to try to sunset some of those old systems and to consolidate and get people talking to each other. These platform APIs all talk the same language. They talk the same domain. You have a shared vocabulary within those areas, and then you have the shared identifiers and other global ideas or global concepts across them so that you're not talking two different things. As it grows, your API platform continues to grow and grow more and more. And you have to start adding ownership. We have to start thinking about who's going to own this part of the portfolio, because not one person or even a small centralized API C4E team could own every one of those APIs that exist. So we have to start getting product owners, product managers trained up and help them to understand what it's going to take to own their particular area, help them carve out a roadmap, and that's part of the enablement. So to grow and mature your platform, you have to start then expanding your understanding of the organization. You have to start mapping out processes, understanding things. So stop talking about systems, start talking about processes, find where it's common, unify on the vocabulary and the understanding, and start to drive toward a nice API platform that represents how your organization works and becomes the digital front door for everything that you do and can help you to automate your back-end systems. And then as you start to do that, your API platform takes shape. It starts to build you start to build a taxonomy, ownership, POs or PMs you might have, own some of this, whatever that might look like. Okay, last one. Scaling your API platform. So, a lot of organizations have a centralized API C4E. So, well, we need to stand up an API C4E. We did that. We got all the processes. We're doing great. But our work queue is about 4 weeks backlogged. What do? We got teams that need to see an API design. They need a review. They need some feedback. They need us to help them. What do we do? Maybe it's one person. Maybe it's 3 people. You're overwhelmed. You're crying. They're hooked on caffeine and can't get off of it because they're still going all hours of the day and night, can't keep up with everything. The centralized API C4E works for a while and is a good stepping stone. But eventually, you'll probably outgrow it if you have any kind of significant sized organizations, mid to large size. You have lots of developers or lots of things going on. So what do you do when your API program grows from a few developers to now more developers are doing it, hundreds, thousands? I actually have a client that has over 10,000 developers, not employees, developers, 2,500 Scrum teams, roughly. That's a lot of Scrum teams to get all unified on a single API platform and to get them all going in the same direction and to review APIs and coach them and teach them and help them understand what's going on. Or what if your APIs grow? Maybe you don't have a huge number of developers, but you're producing loads of APIs. Maybe you're code generating them or something else, and you start going from a few APIs to hundreds to thousands. Again, I've got a client that has 6,000 plus APIs. How do you make sense of that? Unless you have taxonomies and owners and you subdivide things down. So API platforms at scale without the mature ownership and processes around them is going to result in confusion and chaos. You're just going to keep building more APIs because you can't find what you're looking for because things aren't curated, they're not managed, they're not inventoried, they're not tagged, they're not grouped, those kinds of things. But the other challenge is how do I deal with that centralized API C4E? Well, one of the ways to do that is with a federated coach model, and that's one of the things we roll out as an organization's API practice gets bigger as they start developing a really robust API platform. They take the centralized approach and allow those standards and practices to be governed and managed and stewarded by a central group of people, and then they train up and certify coaches that go out and work in the domain area they're at. So they're not just the ivory tower API C4E that doesn't understand how a certain area of the business works. You have federated coaches that understand that area of the business. They may have been there for 10, 20, 30 years, some people. And they understand that area, and they can use that knowledge to really drive home the idea of how to design APIs and how to manage them and give feedback and so on. So they do things like maintain and support the program and the processes. They give feedback to the API C4E. They're boots on the ground giving feedback back to the API C4E saying, that standard's not working. It's not working for anybody anymore. We need to change this. We need to think about this. We need to incorporate this. People are asking for GraphQL. They're asking for gRPC. What do we do? What do we do? You know, let's get together, rally around this, and solve this. And you get a good team to be able to do that, spread out across the organization, giving you feedback. So we end up putting in training something like this. We have like a fundamentals path to help get just about everybody trained up. We get a certified API designer path set up so that people know how to design REST APIs. And then we have, once those two things are completed, an opportunity for people to become API coaches. And they can go through special training and teach them how to conduct API design reviews and facilitate design sessions and get all that extra detail and understanding about how do you help other people design APIs? How do you help other people consume APIs? So here's what I want you to do. You're going to have some homework. You didn't know this, did you? Everybody here can be an API coach in your organization. There is absolutely no reason not to. Okay? It doesn't matter what your job role is. It doesn't matter how technical or non-technical you are. Everybody can be an API coach in some way, fashion, or form to help people understand what APIs do, what they mean, work with teams that are more technical to help them turn their documentation into something that's a little less technical and help out the execs and the directors and the product owners and product managers that are just starting to get their feet wet with APIs. Because we might have been doing this for a while. Some of us might remember SOAP and Corba and all those fun technologies and been doing distributed computing for a while, but it takes a little bit of time to get everybody else up to speed. The second is to invest in growing future API coaches. So those of you that are in the roles that allow you to do that, build API coaches. And so I'm going to share with you all today what's launching soon. We are actually going to be taking the API coaching program that we do for a lot of organizations and opening it up to everybody. So we're going to make it available to everybody else. So right now we're taking up an early interest sign-up list, a wait list. We're going to be launching this in about 3 weeks. We're going to start rolling out courses to help people get up to speed on different aspects of APIs. And we're going to start rolling those courses out step by step to the point where people can actually get certified as API coaches. You can post it on your LinkedIn, you can use it for your own career development, and you can use it as recognition inside your organization, continuing education and everything else. So we're going to be launching that, so I would suggest check that out and see if that's something of interest. Give us your information and we'll start rolling that out and let you know what courses are coming up. Okay. If you missed any of the links or QR codes in this presentation, I have the final link will be to this presentation on my website with all the links and everything else. Okay. So finally, self-service training, making sure you're scaling up everybody's knowledge, bringing people with us. Don't just be the elitist that knows APIs and no one else does. Help bring everybody else along. Develop a federated API coach program for your organization. Help different groups start to bring up other people and support APIs in their area of expertise. Okay? So those were the 5 things we talked about. I am out of time. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.